Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Joe Ellis. I'm an Olympus educator and wedding and portrait photographer here in Dallas, Texas. And today I want to talk about my favorite feature of the EM1 Mark III. I just got my new camera and I've been going through all the menus and settings and seeing what's changed and what's different, coming up with my own custom setup for this camera. But there's one feature in particular that's making a huge difference in my ability to capture images. And I want to go over the ins and outs of that with you guys today. So the real goal of any technology is that it should get out of the way. And with photography, that means that it should become a part of your workflow such that it's one less thing that you have to think about, right? And for me, face detect autofocus has become an order of magnitude better with the EM1 Mark III. So I want to talk about how you use it, how you configure it, and why it's so important. So the first thing is that AF targeting pads, custom AF points, joysticks, all of the things that are in the focus system of all of the Olympus cameras are amazing and all help us move towards that goal of getting to the picture quicker and more easily. But for me, this face detect autofocus is really where it's at because this really allows me to stop having to worry, think about, or even manipulate the camera in a lot of ways while I'm shooting, because this new camera technology, this new face detect will pick out faces, focus on them, track them, and it means that I don't have to worry about that piece. And if my mind cannot be thinking about moving a joystick or where the autofocus point is falling, and instead be thinking about composition and the corners of my frames and the moment that I'm in, then I've really created a huge win. So now that I have this face detect, I really feel like for me, touching any of the autofocus in the camera other than turning it off and on with the back button focus has really gone away. So, with the EM1X, for example, when I'm working at a wedding, I will be using the joystick a lot of the time to move the focus point around so that it is falling exactly on the eye or on the face of the person that I'm photographing. And when I'm tracking something, when I'm using an EM1X, I'm oftentimes having to pan the camera because the focus point is moving along with the person. I'm not moving the focus point over while I'm holding the camera steady. Instead, I'm locked on a focus point and I'm moving the camera with the person. With face detect, now you have the ability to leave the camera in the ideal position in terms of background and in terms of framing, and then have it track the face as it's moving throughout the frame. So that's a really big win, and I think that's something that everybody should try out. And once this technology trickles down into all the models that Olympus has, I think it will be the preferred way that cameras work in the future. And so for me, I want to go through real quickly how I've configured this in the camera, and then we will eventually get into how I set up the entire EM1 Mark III in another video. Okay, so setting up face tracking. So it's really simple on the back of your camera. If you just go to your super control panel, right here in the middle of the frame is how you turn on and off face detect. So you'll want to go ahead and engage that. Now, one of the things that's really important though, is that if face detect were to fail for any reason, like for example, you're photographing somebody and they turn around or look away from you, or if their faces are moving away from the camera and suddenly become too small for the camera to track, you really need to be able to turn off face detect. And so I can customize the EM1 Mark III not only to turn on and off face detect, but also I can customize the button to move between faces. And both of those are really key to this process as well. In order to keep you quickly moving and not have to worry about fumbling with settings, you wouldn't want to have to go into your super control panel to turn on and off face detect, for example. Okay, so first thing first, you turn on face detect. Now I'm a back button focus person. And before this, I was really considering whether that was the best way to go. Because when you're working with an EM1X, for example, I have to bounce my thumb between the joystick on the back of the camera and the AF on button. And so in some ways I was thinking, well, maybe it would be better to go ahead and just use the trigger for focus and retrain myself to do that so that I could always have a thumb on the joystick. But with face detect, thankfully that goes away because I really have a lot of muscle memory built into using back button focus. And what that really allows me to do is when I let off of the back button focus, the camera is locked on whatever I'm focused on. Whenever I'm pushing the button, then the camera is trying to focus. And I love that scenario. I also love that no matter what I'm doing with my index finger in terms of how much pressure I'm putting onto the trigger switch, it's not trying to focus while I'm doing that. So to turn on a back button focus on an EM1 Mark III, you would go to Menu, you go to A1, and then you go down to AEL, AFL, and then you would change the mode of your both SAF and CAF, are the two that I use all the time. So in SAF, you would move to mode 3, and you can see that it's defining the AFL button to do SAF. And then you'll need to do that same thing again for CAF, and I will use mode 4 for this, okay? The last piece of the puzzle, and this is new for the EM1X and the EM1 Mark III, is that you have to go ahead and take the halfway AF menu item here in A1 and turn that to inoperative. Otherwise, you would have both back button focus and trigger focus happening at the same time. So I've got that. And then the next thing I would do is customize my buttons. So I would go down to gear B1, and then the first thing that I do is I go to my FN lever, and my FN lever function needs to be on mode 2. And what that is defined to do is it switches the AF target mode and the AF type when I move between mode 1 and mode 2. So for me, I leave mode 1 on SAF and I leave mode 2 on CAF. The first time you do this, you'll go to mode 2 and it'll probably be in manual focus. Once you're in lever position 2, change it to CAF, and then that setting will stick. So every time you go back to mode 2, it'll be wherever you left it. So in mode 2, I always have it on CAF, and so it stays that way for me. Then when I'm working, if I want to go between SAF and CAF, I don't have to move my eye from the viewfinder. Just a simple flick of the switch on the back of the camera, and I move between the two. So for me, like for example, if at the end of a wedding ceremony, the couple is at the altar and they kiss and their hands go in the air and everyone's congratulating them, they're stationary. Then 1 second later, they start to walk back up the aisle. During that 1 second, I flick my switch up to mode 2. Now the camera goes from a very high precision autofocus SAF to continuous AF, and I can track them walking back up the aisle. Now that may change a little bit as we get out of this quarantine in terms of maybe I can rely on face detect and CAF all of the time, but that's how I've been doing it, and I love being able to switch between the two modes. Now, the next thing that I would do is I would go to my button function, and this is critical, but I would go to the front of the camera, and these two buttons right here, I would program for two things. The top button I program to be able to switch between faces. So if you're shooting a group picture, for example, and you want to make sure that the center of your picture is in focus, or a certain person is where you want the focus plane to fall, and the camera picks up 4 or 5 faces, you can real quickly hit that button, hold it down, and then move the one of the command dials to move between the faces until it locks on the one that you want. The other button, the bottom button, it will actually turn on and off face detect. And this is also critical because there are times when either a face is a little bit too far away, a little bit too small for the camera to pick it up, or like I said, if someone turns too much, then it can sometimes lose the face. And in that case, it will revert back to regular AF, but I prefer to have the positive, I don't want it to jump to another face or come back on and jump to another face in another second. I would rather know that it's off. So if I'm shooting a scenario, face detect is working, all of a sudden it stops for whatever reason, I'll go ahead and just quickly tap that button, turn off face detect, and then I can go right back to regular focusing as I normally would. Now, the more I use the system, the more I find I don't need to do this, but that's a very nice sort of backup reassurance that nothing's going to happen in terms of focus falling in an area of the frame where you don't want it. Okay, so I've programmed those two buttons. Now, as I show you guys a live view through the camera here of my son sort of doing some rollerblading, here's what is really amazing about this, is that in both SAF and CAF, the camera will track faces wherever they are in the frame. And particularly in continuous autofocus, what you can do is like you could have your camera on a tripod, for example, unmoving, perfect background, perfect framing, and then he could come rollerblading through the frame, and wherever he goes, that point of focus is going to track with him as he moves throughout the frame. Now, if I was doing this before, you could try using, autofocus tracking CR plus CF plus TR, or you could try using the older face detect system. Neither one for me with people moving at moderate speeds or even walking speeds was nearly as reliable as it is in the EM1 Mark III. In the EM1 Mark III, and I'm praying that they bring this to the EM1X, there is a much higher degree of the ability of the camera to pick up the face and track the face during movement. And so this is a real panacea, a real win in terms of being able to stop worrying about that focus point. Because what I would do previous to this, because I didn't really feel like I could rely on the tracking feature, is that I would have the camera in CAF, but then I would have to keep the point of focus on top of the subject and be moving the camera around as he was skating towards me. Now I can actually lock the camera in position, even if I'm just hand holding, keeping my framing exactly the way I like it, and then I can have the camera track the subject as it moves through the frame. And this is a person. So it works a lot the same way that the EM1X's artificial intelligence would in terms of tracking, planes, trains, and automobiles, except now you have it with people. And so that's a really huge win. So just operationally really quick, if we go to the camera for a second, you can see that it's picked up 3 of the faces in this sort of little composite I made in Photoshop. And you can see that the furthest one over there on the far left-hand side, the camera feels like that's a little bit too small, so it hasn't quite picked that one up yet. Now, when I was outside shooting live, it had no problem picking up him as he was actually standing in front of me. But here we're shooting a picture of a picture, so it's a good demonstration that at a certain distance, it's not going to pick up the face. But as soon as he comes into range, then it will start to track. And the indication that you have is a box around their face and a smaller box that comes in on the eye. Now, if you want to switch which face you're focusing on, you see the little 4 corners on the white box. That's actually going to move between the boxes that are available to you with one of the custom buttons we set up. And then you can choose which face it's focusing on. So in my case, that's the bottom button on my EM1 Mark III on the front of my EM1 Mark III. So I'll hold that down and I can actually use the control wheel here to move between the faces. So here it is on the right, middle, and top. So that's how you know which face in your frame is receiving the focus. Okay? As you hit the focus button, as you hit the AEL, AFL, it will flash green. Now, I kind of wish it would actually just stay green. I think that would be even better, especially in continuous autofocus. I would love it if it just kind of lit up green and stayed that way. But if you hold down your button, like in back button focus, you can see there's a green dot in the top right-hand corner of the frame. That is actually your indication that it has found a focus point and is locked on it and working the entire time. So it's a little bit of a dance there to make sure that things are working operationally correct. But 99% of the time, I found this to be very reliable. But like I said, I do wish that if they could make one little firmware adjustment, we could change the color of the active face while it's tracking to be green. That would be amazing. Okay, so that's moving them around. And then the other button I have programmed on the front is this. If I hit that button, it just turns face detect on and off. So you can see here on the top of the screen that you have the little smiley face icon and the little IL for left eye or right eye if you have that set. And if you just hit that button on the front now, I turn on and off. And then if I hit the focus point again, it's going to go back to my regular autofocus points for the camera. So that's kind of how I set it up. I'm out there working. I'm using that face detect most of the time. And if there is any kind of moment where things change and I need to revert back, I have that button to turn it on and off really quickly. If I'm shooting more than one person and I want the camera to lock on a particular face, hit that button on the top of the front top of my EM1 Mark III, and I would move the focus point to another box, move the box over to the face that I want to track. Using those 2 features in conjunction, along with back button focus, has been super, super reliable. And like I said, for me as a people shooter, this is an absolutely huge win because I no longer have to worry about moving my autofocus point as I'm working. The camera will track a face, and if it's close enough, it will track an eye. And if I just pull up this picture into the frame just to show the difference, if I get that to sit right there, then I will turn on face detect, and it's on the old one, so I'll move it over really quick. And you can see there's a little box there now. And the box within the box is the eye autofocus. And you can program that in your super control panel to be either the left eye or the right eye in your frame. So if you have a preference there, it can do that. And I just find that this new feature is my favorite feature of the EM1 Mark III. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one, where we're going to go over all of my customizations of the EM1 Mark III in terms of how I set it up for wedding wedding, portrait, and event work. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you all in the next one.